Alright guys, basically I'm going to do this all in one take so that way it's not super boring and awkward. Alright, let's get it. At the end of the Civil War, the United States entered a period of enormous change. American industry expanded, factories cropped up in urban areas with dense populations, companies needed a continuous supply of workers, but they didn't have to look far. Factory work depended on machines and not skilled workers. Many people were willing to work for low pay under harsh conditions, and some workers were soldiers. You know what? Never mind. Some workers were soldiers returning from the battlefields. Others were Americans who moved from rural farming and communities to cities. Many were immigrants who came to the United States in waves during the last part of 19th. The last part of the 19th century. All right. The rise of the factory system greatly altered the workplace for skilled workers. Once, craftsmen had been involved in every phase of production. Mass production in factories changed that because machines created pieces that had previously been handmade. Skilled craftsmen now had to sell their labor to factory owners. Women and children, some as young as 5 years old, held full-time jobs, and full-time meant 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Often, factory owners cared more about profits than the well-being of their workers. Long hours and dangerous working conditions were common. Owners did not have to worry about federal, state, and local laws that protected workers. There were no such laws. And individuals who objected to hours, pay, or conditions were fired. Workers injured on the job were replaced, and there was no system to help those who were suddenly jobless. Eventually, workers found that they needed to speak up as a group rather than as individuals. So some workers organized labor unions. Doing so, they believed, would give them enough power to demand better hours, pay, and working conditions. As the 19th century ended, unions continued to gain members. Government officials as well as business owners fought them. Business owners frequently refused to recognize unions. Workers in many factories were prohibited from attending union meetings. In some cases, workers were fired for joining a union. Many workers were forced to sign so-called yellow dog contracts, in which they promised they would not join the union. At that time, the biggest obstacle to unions was the state and federal courts. When lawmakers passed laws declaring yellow dog contracts illegal, the Supreme Court overturned it. When a hat makers union went on strike in Connecticut, the state Supreme Court said strikers were interfering with the company's business. The court allowed the owners to sue the union. Despite court decisions, union membership steadily increased. At the end of the 19th century, unions had successfully demonstrated their ability to organize workers. They had won victories for higher wages and shorter workdays. However, the issue of working conditions remained controversial. This issue became more difficult for the public to ignore as workplace disasters occurred. In 1907, more than 300 miners died at a coal mine collapse. In 1911, a fire in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City emphasized the dangerous conditions in factories. The fire, fueled by the oil in the machines and many stacks of cloth, raced through the top floors of the building that employed more than 500 young women in sweatshop conditions. To prevent theft by employees, all the doors but one had been locked. There was no sprinkler system in the building, and there was only one single fire escape. Terrified workers jumped from the building to their deaths when they realized fire department ladders couldn't reach them in the top stories of the building. The fire killed 146 workers, most of them young female immigrants. As a result of the fire, the state of New York began to study safety in the workplace. However, when owners of the company went on to trial for the deaths, they were found not guilty. Soon after that disaster, the federal government took steps to protect workers. In 1913, the, the United States Department of Labor was established. Changes in urban living gave rise to a new class of professional politicians. These men observed the changes in their cities and saw ways to increase their power. Before this time, most American political leaders had been educated and wealthy. The new leaders came mostly from the immigrant groups of the previous generation, and they saw that their cities needed new services, such as schools, police, lighting, and sanitation. These new political leaders formed organizations that reached down to the level of neighborhoods. They provided only help that the poor could get. No. They provided the only help that the poor could get. That's right. In return, they usually asked for just one thing: the new citizens' vote. By using the democratic system, local leaders took office. They were able to get money for services in their wards and political power for themselves. This meant influence for the boss at the top of the organization and also for the people who organized his supporters. These organizations were known as political machines. The most famous political machine was the one that ran in New York City. It was called Tammany Hall, or just Tammany. Originally a social club, Tammany became associated with the Democratic Party in New York early in the 19th century. Yeah. For several decades, it expanded its power by finding jobs and housing for immigrants. Tammany's leaders then helped immigrants attain citizenship so they could vote. It was not unusual for them to give the poorest families a few dollars for food and fuel. With the power gained from this neighborhood level of involvement, Tammany leaders were able to get elected to office at city and sometimes state governments. The quest for power often led to corruption. Bosses found where the city was planning to put up a new courthouse or a transit line and bought the property before the project was announced. They then sold the land they then sold the land to the city at a profit. The leaders also took money from other people in the organization to exchange for jobs on the public payroll. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, was founded in 1909 and was one of the most influential and earliest civil organizations in the United States. The NAACP was founded by white and black intellectuals and first looked into uniform whites, you know what? They looked to uniform. They looked to inform whites on the need for racial inequality. The YMCA, or the Young Men's Christian Association, was founded in London, England, on June 6, 1844, by George Williams. YMCA was founded due to the unhealthy social conditions growing towards the end of the Industrial Revolution, and the growing of railroads and centralization of commerce and industry drew many young men who were in need of jobs to places like London, where they worked 10 to 12 hours a day for 6 days a week. These young men who came to work were far away from home or any family, forcing them to live at the workplace in overcrowded rooms. Outside of the shops, they slept in things. Outside of the shops, they slept in things. Outside of the shops they slept in, things were not good. Pickpocketing, drunks, open sewers, and thugs were all present. George Williams, born on a farm in 1821, came to London as a sales assistant in a draper's shop, and he and a group of fellow drapers organized the first YMCA to substitute Bible study and prayer for the young men's life on the streets.
European and Asian immigrants during the 18th century. Here's what you need to know. There was a large gap in the respect and fairness between the two immigrant groups. European migrants were usually welcomed and were most likely of all the immigrants to be hired for typical work, such as white-collar work and manager positions. Asian immigrants, well, let's just say they were put to work on railroads, or other jobs that nobody wanted, without an even hello. An example would be a European man going into work and saying, "I'm sick." And the boss would be like, "You're all good." While the Asian would be whipped and beaten if he took a 10-second break. Thankfully, there were signed agreements such as the Gentlemen Agreements Act of Japan. However, America was a little self-entitled and pulled a Trump, blocked all of the Chinese immigrants with the Chinese Exclusion Act. Economic and physiological ideologies. Laissez-faire means government should hardly intervene with economic affairs. Market economy is an economy run by the open market. Mixed economy is an economy in which private enterprises exist in combination with government regulations to protect the people. Socialism is when an economic system in which the factors of production are owned by the public and operate for the welfare of all. Communism is a political system in which the government, aka the state, owns all of the property and dominates all aspects of life in a country. Anarchy. Well, let me tell you, it's a lack of government and law, and it usually causes confusion. Factors of production is, hang on, the resources required to produce things we would like to have. These are land, capital labor, and enterprises. And that's all, folks.